He thought he'd won. He thought he could take everything: the house, my father's legacy, even control over my life. But Steve forgot one crucial detail. I was the one who signed the original. This isn't just about a house. It's about betrayal, greed, and the power of protecting what's rightfully yours. It's about the moment when you realize the person who should protect you has chosen a stranger over blood. And it's about the sweet satisfaction of reminding someone that paperwork matters, especially when your late father was smart enough to plan for vultures circling his nest. My name is Ava Caldwell, and I'm 35 years old. As I sit in my corner office at Nexus Technologies in downtown Portland, debugging code that would make most programmers weep, I can't help but think about how different my life is from my father's. Where I build digital architectures, he built real ones, with his own hands, sweat, and an unwavering dedication that bordered on obsession. Michael Caldwell wasn't just a contractor. He was an artist who happened to work with wood and stone. His company, Caldwell Restoration, had brought dozens of Portland's historic homes back to life. But his true masterpiece was our family home in Riverside Heights, a 1920s craftsman that he'd rescued from demolition 15 years ago. I remember being 20, home from MIT for summer break, watching him work on that house. Every detail was meticulously planned. He'd spread blueprints across our kitchen table, his weathered hands tracing the lines he'd drawn himself. "Ava," he'd say, his eyes bright with passion. "This isn't just lumber and nails. This is legacy. This is what we leave behind when we're gone." The house was more than a project. It was his love letter to craftsmanship. Every built-in bookshelf, every restored hardwood plank, every carefully selected fixture told a story. The workshop in the basement still smells like sawdust and linseed oil. The kitchen cabinets bear the slight imperfections that prove human hands made them. The banister on the stairs has been worn smooth by countless trips up and down, first by him during construction, then by our family living our lives. When the heart attack took him last year, it was swift and merciless. One moment he was reviewing plans for a Victorian restoration in Laurelhurst. The next, he was gone. The funeral was a blur of faces: clients whose homes he'd saved, workers who'd learned their trade under his guidance, and my mother Linda, devastated and lost without her partner of 38 years. The will reading was straightforward. Dad had always been meticulous about paperwork, a trait I'd inherited. The house went to me, along with his tools and the business assets. Mom got the investment accounts and life insurance, more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life. She'd never shown interest in the house's technical aspects anyway, always joking that she was just happy to live in Dad's masterpiece. "I want you to have it," she'd said that day, squeezing my hand in the lawyer's office. "Your father would want you to have it. You understand what it meant to him." I did understand, which is why I kept everything exactly as he'd left it. His coffee mug still sat on the workshop bench. His pencils remained sharp in their holder. The house wasn't just my inheritance. It was the physical embodiment of everything Michael Caldwell had been. For 6 months after his death, Mom and I existed in that house like ghosts, moving through rooms heavy with memory. I took extended leave from work, partly to handle the estate, mostly because neither of us could bear to be alone. We'd have coffee in the breakfast nook he'd built, neither of us sitting in his chair. We'd tend the garden he'd designed, following his carefully documented planting schedule. I thought we were healing. I thought we were finding our way forward together, honoring Dad's memory while slowly learning to live with the gap he'd left behind. I was wrong. 6 months after Dad's funeral, Mom started attending a grief support group at the community center. I encouraged it. She needed to talk to people who understood her loss. What I didn't expect was for her to come home one Tuesday evening with a sparkle in her eyes I hadn't seen since before Dad died. "I met someone interesting today," she said, almost shyly. "Steve Donovan. He lost his wife 2 years ago. He really understands what I'm going through." At first, I was happy for her. Mom deserved companionship, someone to share coffee with, maybe catch a movie. Steve seemed harmless enough when she first brought him by, a tall, silver-haired man in his late 50s, with a firm handshake and an easy smile. He owned a small real estate investment company. He said, dealing mostly in rental properties. He complimented the house effusively, running his hands along the original wood trim with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "Your father was a true craftsman," he said, though something in the way he appraised the built-ins felt more like calculation than admiration. "This place must be worth a fortune now, with the market the way it is." The changes started small. Steve began joining us for dinner twice a week, then 3 times. Then he was simply there every evening. Mom started dressing differently. Gone were Dad's old flannel shirts she'd worn like armor, replaced with new clothes that seemed to have Steve's fingerprints all over them. She traded her Subaru for a flashy BMW because Steve said she deserved to treat herself. Her weekend trips to the farmer's market became shopping sprees at high-end boutiques. 3 months after they met, I came home from work to find Steve's Lincoln Continental in the driveway and a U-Haul truck backed up to the front door. "Oh, honey," Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. Steve's lease was up, and it seemed silly for him to find a new place when we have all this room. I stood in the doorway, watching strangers carry Steve's oversized leather furniture into our living room. "Mom, this is fast. Don't you think we should talk about this?" Steve appeared behind her, his hand possessively on her shoulder. "Ava, your mother and I aren't teenagers. When you know, you know. Besides, this house is too big for just 2 people. It needs life in it again." Life, as if Dad's death had drained the house of its vitality, and only Steve Donovan could resurrect it. Within a week, Steve had established himself as more than a guest. He took over Dad's spot at the dining table. His toiletries crowded out mine in the main bathroom. His sports memorabilia began appearing on shelves that had held Dad's architecture books. He walked through the house with a proprietary air, making comments about improvements and modernization that made my skin crawl. "That workshop's just wasted space," he mentioned one evening. "Cutting into his steak? Well done. Of course, the opposite of how Dad liked his. Could be a great home theater." "It's Dad's workshop," I said flatly. "Was," Steve corrected, pointing his knife at me. "Your father's gone. Ava, this house needs to serve the living, not memorialize the dead." Mom said nothing, just pushed her food around her plate. This became her pattern. Silence when Steve overstepped, as if her voice had been packed away with Dad's clothes she'd donated without asking me. Then came Derek and Lacey, Steve's adult children from his previous marriage. Derek, 28, allegedly between jobs, but somehow driving a new Dodge Charger. Lacey, 25, an influencer who spent her days taking selfies and complaining about the house's dated aesthetic. "God, this place is like a museum," Lacey whined during their first visit, her fake nails tapping against her phone. "Who still has real wood floors? Do you know how hard these are to maintain?" "Some people appreciate craftsmanship," I replied. Derek snorted. "Some people live in this century. Dad's right. This place has potential, but it needs serious updating." The word potential hung in the air like a threat. I looked at Mom, waiting for her to say something, to defend Dad's work, our home, but she just smiled weakly and offered everyone more wine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, running my fingers along the surfaces Dad had lovingly restored, and I knew. Steve wasn't here for my mother. He was here for this house, for what it represented, for what it was worth. And my mother, lost in her grief and desperate for connection, couldn't see the wolf she'd invited into our door. The sound of a power saw ripping through wood woke me on a Saturday morning. I bolted from bed and ran downstairs to find 2 men in work clothes dismantling the built-in bookshelf in the living room, the one Dad and I had spent 3 weeks building together the summer before I left for college. "Stop!" I shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" Steve emerged from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, casual as if he hadn't just authorized the destruction of something irreplaceable. "Morning, Ava. Just making some improvements. These old built-ins make the room feel cramped. We're opening up the space." "You're destroying my father's work." My hands were shaking. Each piece of wood they removed had been carefully selected, shaped, fitted by Dad's hands. I could still remember him teaching me how to use the level, how to ensure every shelf was perfect. "Times change," Steve said, taking a slow sip of his coffee from Dad's mug. I noticed, "Your father liked all this old-fashioned stuff, but I'm bringing this place into the 21st century. Property values are about modern, open concepts now." "This isn't your property to change," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Steve set down the mug with deliberate slowness. "I live here. I'm contributing to the household. That gives me a say." "Contributing? You mean eating our food and using our electricity?" His face darkened. "I'm taking care of your mother. Someone has to, since you're too busy with your little computer job to notice she's been drowning in this mausoleum." Before I could respond, Mom appeared, still in her robe. She looked at the dismantled bookshelf, at the workers, at me, and sighed. "Ava, Steve's just trying to help. The house does feel a bit heavy. Maybe some changes would be good." "Mom, these aren't just shelves. Dad and I—" "Your father's gone," she said sharply, then softer. "He's gone, honey. We can't keep everything frozen in time. But this is what he wanted preserved. This is why he left the house to you." "Yes, I know," Steve interrupted. "But your mother lives here too. Doesn't she get a say in her own home?" The manipulation was so transparent it made me sick, but Mom just nodded, looking relieved that someone else was fighting her battles. The workers continued their destruction as I stood there, helpless, by noon. The bookshelf was gone, leaving pale shadows on the wall where it had stood for years. Steve had already ordered a flat-screen TV mount to go in its place. Over the next 2 weeks, the assault continued. The vintage light fixtures Dad had sourced from estate sales were replaced with generic Home Depot specials. The original brass door hardware was swapped for brushed nickel. The hand-carved corbels under the breakfast bar, deemed dust collectors, were removed and thrown away before I could save them. Each change was presented as an improvement, as modernization, as adding value. Each change erased a little more of my father. I tried reasoning with Mom privately, catching her one afternoon while Steve was out. "Mom, please, this isn't what Dad would have wanted." She was arranging flowers, store-bought, not from our garden. "Your father isn't here to want anything anymore. Ava, Steve is trying to make this house livable for us now." It was already livable. It was perfect. Perfect for you, maybe. You and your father, always talking about wood grain and joint work and things I never understood. But I live here too, and I never asked for a shrine. The words stung. "Is that what you think this is? A shrine? Isn't it?" She turned to face me, and I saw months of suppressed frustration. "You walk around here like a ghost yourself, preserving every tool, every pencil mark, every coffee stain. Steve makes me feel alive again. He makes me feel like I have a future, not just a past." "By destroying everything Dad built?" "By making room for new memories," she said. "I'm sorry if that hurts you, but I deserve to be happy." That evening, Steve announced his next project, converting the basement workshop into a CrossFit gym for Derek, who was moving in temporarily while he got back on his feet. I stood up from the dinner table. "Absolutely not. That workshop stays as it is." Steve leaned back in his chair, Dad's chair. "I don't recall asking for permission. Derek needs a place to stay, and that space is just collecting dust. That space is part of my inheritance. The house is in my name." "The house where your mother lives," Steve said slowly, as if explaining to a child. "Are you really going to deny her the right to have her family here?" "Her family?" I looked at Mom. "Since when is Derek your family?" Mom wouldn't meet my eyes. "Steve and I have been discussing making things official. A wedding, small, simple, maybe next month." The room spun. In less than a year, she'd gone from grieving widow to Steve's fiancé, and our house, Dad's masterpiece, was being carved up piece by piece. That night, I heard them talking in low voices in the master bedroom, planning their next improvements, and I knew this was just the beginning. I came home from a 3-day tech conference in Seattle to find the workshop gutted. Dad's tools, some of them antiques passed down from his father, were gone. The workbench he'd built himself, with its carefully organized drawers and custom vise mounts, had been broken apart and hauled away. In its place stood Derek's gym equipment, mirrors, rubber mats, and a sound system blasting aggressive rap music. "Where are my father's tools?" I confronted Steve in the kitchen, where he was making a protein shake. "Sold them," he said without looking up. "Got good money, too. Vintage tools are hot right now. Derek needed the space cleared." "You sold them? Those were mine. They were specifically left to me in the will." "They were taking up space. Besides, when's the last time you used a hand plane?" He turned to face me, smirking. "That money went toward Derek's equipment, contributing to the household, you know." I wanted to scream. Instead, I took photos of everything. The empty workshop, the gym equipment, Derek doing bicep curls where Dad once crafted miracles from raw wood. The next blow came when I found Lacey in my childhood bedroom with a contractor, discussing paint colors. The walls still bore the height marks Dad had penciled in yearly until I turned 18. "What are you doing in my room?" Lacey didn't even look embarrassed. "This is going to be my content creation studio. The light in here is perfect for filming. Don't worry, your stuff's in the garage." "My stuff?" I pushed past her to find my room stripped, my furniture, my books, everything moved out. The pencil marks on the doorframe had been painted over with primer. "Those marks," I whispered, touching the fresh paint. "Those were—" Dad measured my height there every birthday. Pencil on the walls?" Lacey wrinkled her nose. "So unsanitary. Steve said I could have this room since you barely use it anyway." "I use it when I stay over." "Well, now you can use the guest room, the small one by the kitchen." She turned back to the contractor. "I'm thinking blush pink with gold accents." I documented everything, every change, every destruction, every erasure of my father's presence. The original hardwood floors in the hallway, the ones Dad had spent weeks refinishing by hand, were covered with cheap vinyl planks because Lacey complained about her heels clicking too loudly. The vintage medicine cabinet in the bathroom, with its beveled mirror and carved details, was replaced with a generic white box from IKEA. But the final straw came when I discovered Steve in Dad's study, sorting through his papers. "These old contracts and blueprints are just clutter," he said, feeding them into a shredder. "No point keeping business records for a dead company." I lunged for the papers, managing to save a handful. Among them was the original blueprint for our house's restoration, covered in Dad's handwritten notes. "These are historical documents. This is the history of the house." "This is garbage taking up valuable real estate," Steve countered. "I'm turning this room into my office. Already have a buyer interested in that old drafting table." "Dad's drafting table? The one from the 1920s? "Got $1,200 for it. Not bad for old furniture." I felt something break inside me. This wasn't just renovation. It was erasure. Steve was systematically eliminating every trace of my father, selling off pieces of him for profit. That evening, I set up cameras, small, discreet ones I borrowed from work. If Steve was going to destroy my father's legacy, I was going to document every moment of it. Mom found me installing one in the hallway. "What are you doing?" "Protecting what's left of Dad's work." She sighed. "Ava, you're being paranoid. Steve's just trying to—" "To what, Mom? Erase Dad? Profit from his death?" "To move forward." She looked exhausted. "Not everyone processes grief by turning their home into a museum. Some of us need change to heal." "This isn't healing. This is Steve taking over everything Dad built and turning it into cash." "Steve loves me," she said quietly. "He loves us. Steve loves this house and what it's worth." She slapped me. It wasn't hard, but the shock of it, my mother had never raised a hand to me, left us both stunned. "I'm getting married next week," she said, her voice shaking. "Steve and I went to City Hall today to file the paperwork. You can be happy for me, or you can keep living in the past. But either way, things are changing." That night, I sat in what was left of Dad's study, holding the blueprints I'd saved, and started making a plan of my own. Steve might think he'd won, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. The house was in my name, and somewhere in Dad's meticulous paperwork, I was going to find the ammunition I needed to fight back. I opened my laptop and started searching for a lawyer. If Steve wanted a war, he was about to get one. I found Mom in the garden, or what was left of it. Steve had hired landscapers to tear out Dad's heritage roses and replace them with low-maintenance artificial turf. She was sitting on the bench Dad had built, looking lost among the synthetic green. "Mom, we need to talk, really talk, without Steve around." She looked up, and I saw she'd been crying. "About what? How disappointed you are in me? How I'm betraying your father's memory? About what's really happening here." I sat beside her, pulling out my tablet. I've been documenting everything. The tools Steve sold? They were worth at least $30,000 at auction. He got maybe $3,000. The drafting table? That was a genuine Mayline from 1922. Museums would have paid 5 times what he got. Money doesn't matter. It does when he's stealing from us, Mom. He's systematically stripping the house of everything valuable while destroying its historical integrity. She stood abruptly. "Steve is bringing life back into this house. You and your father never understood. I felt like a guest here, always careful not to disturb his precious wood or his perfect paint. Steve makes me feel like it's my home too. It was always your home. Dad built everything for you. The kitchen layout you sketched, the reading nook with perfect afternoon light, the—" "Stop," she was shaking. "Just stop. Your father is dead. Ava, dead, and I'm still alive. I'm 58 years old, and I have maybe 20, 30 years left. Am I supposed to spend them as a widow, preserving his memory like some Victorian mourner? No, but Steve loves me. He takes me dancing. He makes me laugh. He doesn't spend every dinner talking about wood grain and joint techniques." Her voice cracked. "He sees me, not just as Michael's wife or your mother, but as Linda, just Linda." "Mom." I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "The house is yours. Yes, your father made sure of that. But this is my home too. And Steve is going to be my husband. You can accept that. Or you can keep fighting and make everyone miserable. What about the fact that he's sending me bills for his improvements? $20,000 so far for renovations I never approved?" She went pale. "What bills?" I showed her the invoices Steve had been sending through his company, charging me for the destruction of my own property. Her face went through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, a defensive anger. "There must be a misunderstanding. Steve wouldn't—" "Steve is, Mom. He's not just changing the house. He's trying to force me out. Derek told me yesterday that once you're married, they plan to claim tenant rights and make my life hell until I sign over my inheritance." "Derek's just— he's young. He doesn't understand." "Derek understands perfectly. So does Lacey. They see $1 million property in Portland's hottest neighborhood, and they want it." Mom sank back onto the bench. "You're wrong. Steve isn't like that. He lost his wife. He understands grief." "Did he? Have you ever seen pictures of his wife? Met any of her family?" "Mom, I hired a private investigator." Her head snapped up. "You what?" "His wife didn't die. They divorced 3 years ago. She's living in Arizona with a restraining order against him. He cleaned out their accounts and tried to forge her signature on their house deed." I pulled out the investigator's report, but Mom wouldn't look at it. "Those are lies. Someone else with the same name. Or—" "Mom, please, look at this. Really look." She stood up, backing away from me like I was dangerous. "You're so desperate to keep your father's house exactly as it was that you'll destroy my happiness. You'd rather see me alone and miserable than with someone who isn't him. That's not— Steve warned me you'd do this. He said you'd try to turn me against him because you can't let go." She was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "He said you'd make up stories, try to sabotage us. He's manipulating you." "No, Ava, you are— With your cameras and your investigators and your constant reminders that nothing will ever be as good as it was with your perfect father in his perfect house. She started walking toward the back door, then turned. The wedding is Saturday, 2 o'clock at the courthouse. You're not invited, and after we're married, Steve thinks it would be best if you found somewhere else to live for a while. Give us all some space to heal. Mom, this is my house. And I'm your mother, she screamed it, loud enough that the neighbors probably heard. I'm your mother, and I'm choosing Steve. I'm choosing to be happy. I'm choosing to live. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you should ask yourself, who's really dishonoring your father's memory? The people trying to move forward, or the daughter so obsessed with the past that she'd rather see her mother miserable than happy with someone new? She went inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows Dad had carefully restored. Through the glass, I could see Steve waiting for her, pulling her into his arms, shooting me a look of triumph over her shoulder. I stood alone in the ruined garden, surrounded by artificial grass and the scent of fresh paint that covered old wood, and realized my mother had chosen her side. And it wasn't mine. Oliver Grant's office was in a converted Victorian in the Pearl District, all exposed brick and modern furniture, the kind of successful practice that suggested he won more than he lost. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that took in everything as I spread my documents across his conference table. Let me make sure I understand, he said, reviewing the papers. Your father left you the house in his will. Free and clear. Your mother's boyfriend has moved in, made unauthorized changes, and is now billing you for them? Future stepfather, I corrected bitterly. They're getting married Saturday. That could complicate things. He picked up the deed. But this is interesting. Your father didn't just leave you the house. He filed it with the Historical Preservation Society and added a conservation covenant. A what? Oliver smiled for the first time. Your father was smarter than Steve gave him credit for. See this clause? Any alterations to the property's historical character without written permission from the deed holder, that's you, constitute criminal vandalism and breach of covenant. The penalties aren't just civil, they're criminal. My heart started racing. So Steve could be arrested? Better. Every change he's made has to be reversed at his expense, or he faces prosecution. And here's the beautiful part. Oliver pulled out another document. Your father specified that anyone who violates the covenant loses all rights to residency, even as a spouse of a family member. Dad knew, I whispered. He knew someone might try this. Your father protected you and his legacy. The question is, how do you want to proceed? I thought about Mom's tears, her accusations, her choice. Then I thought about Dad's workshop. Now a gym, his roses, now plastic grass. His life's work being sold off piece by piece. I want everything documented, every violation, every forged invoice, every sale of stolen property. Oliver nodded, making notes. I'll need those security camera recordings you mentioned, and we should contact the Historical Preservation Society immediately. They have their own enforcement power, and they don't take kindly to covenant violations. What about my mother? She's been manipulated, but she's still participating. Your mother has no legal standing. The house is yours. Once we document the violations, we can file for immediate eviction of all unauthorized occupants. Including her? Oliver's expression softened slightly. If she's married to someone committing fraud and vandalism against your property, she may have to make a choice. But Ava, based on what you've told me, she's already made it. Over the next 3 days, Oliver and I built our case with methodical precision. The Historical Preservation Society sent their own inspector, who was horrified by the damage. This original woodwork, he said, running his hand along a doorframe Derek had started to sand down. This is irreplaceable. What kind of monster destroys craftsmanship like this? We documented everything. The destroyed built-ins, the painted-over height marks, the removed fixtures. Oliver subpoenaed Steve's financial records and found more. He'd been taking loans against the house's value, using forged documents suggesting he was a co-owner. This is fraud, Oliver said. Major fraud, He's looking at serious jail time. But the masterpiece of our strategy came from an unexpected source. Oliver found a clause in Dad's business contracts that I'd overlooked. All his restoration work came with a lifetime guarantee, transferable to heirs. Every piece he'd built or restored was legally protected. Your father didn't just build a house, Oliver explained. He created a legal fortress. Steve walked into a trap the moment he touched that first bookshelf. Thursday evening, 2 days before the wedding, I was reviewing our filing when Derek cornered me in the kitchen. "You need to back off," he said, crowding into my space. "You're messing with things you don't understand." "Like what? Your father's criminal history? The 3 fraud convictions? The bankruptcy filed under mysterious circumstances?" His face darkened. "Dad's going to own this house, one way or another. Actually, he's going to jail, one way or another." Derek slammed his fist on the counter. "You think you're so smart? But paper doesn't mean anything if you're not around to enforce it." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact. Accidents happen, especially to people who live alone in big houses." I held up my phone, showing it was recording. "Thanks for that. Oliver will love adding criminal threatening to the charges." Derek's face went white, then red. He stormed out, and I heard him on the phone with Steve, panic in his voice. That night, I sat in Dad's study, what was left of it, finalizing everything with Oliver. We would file everything Monday morning, giving Steve just enough time to think he'd won with the Saturday wedding. "Are you ready for this?" Oliver asked over the phone. "Once we file, there's no going back. Your relationship with your mother ended the day she chose him over Dad's memory, over me. Then we proceed as planned. By Monday afternoon, Steve Donovan will be in custody, and everyone living in that house illegally will have 24 hours to vacate." I hung up and looked at the last photo I had of Dad, standing proud in front of the house he'd saved. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I've got this. Just like you taught me. Measure twice, cut once, and Steve? He never bothered to measure at all." Sunday morning, the day after Mom's courthouse wedding, I called for a family meeting. Steve arrived in his new suit, still glowing with victory. Mom on his arm wearing the wedding ring that looked too heavy for her hand. Derek and Lacey followed, already discussing their plans for their house. The living room was full. Steve had invited his brother and sister-in-law. Mom had asked her sister Ruth to come, and even Pastor Williams from Mom's church was there, all ready to celebrate the newlyweds and probably pressure me into accepting the new family dynamic. "Thank you all for coming," I said, standing by the fireplace Dad had restored stone by stone. "I wanted to discuss the future of this house." Steve leaned back in Dad's leather chair, fingers laced behind his head. "Good. It's time you accepted reality. Ava, your mother and I are married now. This is our family home." "Actually, Steve, that's what I wanted to clarify." I pulled out my folder, hands steady despite my racing heart. "This house belongs to me, solely, completely, legally." "On paper, maybe," Steve said, waving dismissively. "But we've invested sweat equity, Derek and Lacey have established residency, your mother has lifetime rights as the widow." "No, she doesn't." I pulled out the will. Dad was very specific. The house went to me alone. Mom received the financial assets. "But we've improved it," Lacey piped up. "The renovations alone are worth $50,000. "You mean the destruction of historical elements?" I pulled out the Historical Preservation Society report. "Every change you've made is a violation of the conservation covenant Dad filed in 2019. The room went quiet. Steve's confident smile faltered. "What covenant?" Mom asked, looking between us. "Dad registered this house as a historical property with strict preservation requirements. Any alteration without written permission from the deed holder, me, is a criminal offense." Steve stood up. "That's ridiculous. You can't enforce—" "Actually, I can—" I handed him the legal filing. "Oliver Grant, my attorney, has documented every violation, the destroyed bookshelf, the sold tools, the painted-over historical details, the removed fixtures. Each one carries a fine of up to $10,000. and potential jail time. Pastor Williams shifted uncomfortably. Surely this is a family matter that can be resolved. Is fraud a family matter? I turned to him. Steve has been taking loans against this house using forged documents. He's been billing me for unauthorized work. He sold property specifically willed to me. I pulled out the private investigator's report. Steve's wife isn't dead. She's living in Arizona with a restraining order against him for doing exactly what he's trying to do here. Mom's face went white. That's not… Steve? Steve's mask finally slipped. You little bitch. You think you're so smart? Your mother chose me. We're married. Community property means… Nothing. Washington isn't a community property state for inherited assets. I pulled out the final document. And this is my favorite part. Dad included a clause that anyone who damages the historical integrity of this house forfeits all rights to residency, even as a spouse. You can't throw your mother out, Aunt Ruth gasped. I'm not throwing anyone out. Steve threw himself out the moment he touched Dad's workshop, and Mom chose to stand by him. Mom stood up, tears streaming. Ava, please, don't do this. We can work something out. Like you worked something out when Steve destroyed Dad's height marks? When he sold Grandpa's tools? When he turned the workshop into a gym? My voice broke slightly. You watched him erase Dad piece by piece and said nothing. Derek stepped forward aggressively. You think you've won? We'll contest this. We'll tie you up in court for years. With what money? Oliver Grant walked in. I'd asked him to wait in the study. The liens against Steve's assets went through yesterday. Every penny he has will go to restitution and fines. Steve's brother stood up. This is insane. You're destroying your family over a house. No, I said quietly. Steve destroyed this family when he tried to steal what my father built. I'm just protecting it. I placed the conservation covenant on the coffee table, then the eviction notices. You have 14 days to vacate, all of you. The Historical Preservation Society will be supervising the restoration of everything you've damaged, at your expense, Steve. You vindictive little… Steve lunged toward me, but Oliver stepped between us. Assault would add to your charges. Mr. Donovan, I'd think carefully. Mom looked at me with something between heartbreak and rage. I'm your mother. How can you do this to your mother? How could you do this to Dad? I responded. He spent 15 years restoring this house. You let Steve destroy it in 6 months. I was lonely, she screamed. I was grieving. So was I. But I didn't let someone con me into betraying everything Dad stood for. The room erupted in shouting. Steve threatening lawsuits, Derek posturing, Lacey crying about her studio, Mom sobbing. Through it all, I stood silent by the fireplace, a hand on the mantel Dad had carved. Finally, Oliver raised his voice. The notices are legal and final. 14 days. Any property left after that will be disposed of. Any attempts at harassment or intimidation will result in immediate arrest. Steve grabbed Mom's arm. Come on, Linda, we'll fight this. She can't… Actually, I said, pulling out one last document. There's one more thing. Dad wrote me a letter, to be opened if the house was ever threatened. I unfolded it, my hands trembling. He said he knew Mom might remarry, might be vulnerable to someone who would try to take advantage. He said he trusted me to protect not just the house, but her too, even if she couldn't see the danger herself. I looked at Mom. He loved you enough to make sure no one could steal your home, even if you invited them in yourself. This isn't me destroying our family. This is me saving what's left of it. Mom collapsed into a chair, the fight draining out of her. Steve stood frozen, calculating, probably realizing his con had failed. 14 days, I repeated. Starting now. The 14 days passed in hostile silence. Steve tried every angle, threatening legal action, attempting to claim squatters' rights, even trying to secretly sell fixtures before leaving. Each attempt was met with documentation from Oliver and warnings from the police. Derek's tough guy act crumbled when faced with actual legal consequences. Lacey live-streamed her tragedy, until Oliver sent a cease and desist for defamation. Mom said nothing to me. She packed in silence, loaded boxes in silence, and left in silence on day 13. On the morning of day 14, I stood in the empty house. Steve's leather furniture was gone, leaving my father's carefully restored hardwood floors scarred but visible again. The spaces where Dad's work had been destroyed gaped like wounds, but wounds that could heal with proper care. The restoration team from the Historical Preservation Society arrived that afternoon. Marcus, the lead craftsman, whistled low as he surveyed the damage. "Your father was Michael Caldwell? I apprenticed under him 20 years ago. This is criminal. What they did. Can you fix it?" He ran his hand along a door frame Steve had started to sand down. "We'll need to source period-appropriate wood, match the original stain. It won't be easy or cheap. Lucky for you, Steve Donovan's assets are paying for everything." Over the next 3 months, I watched Dad's house come back to life. The built-in bookshelf was reconstructed using Dad's original plans. The workshop was restored with tools Marcus had saved from his time with Dad. He insisted on donating them. "Mike would want them home," he said simply. The hardest part was the doorframe with the height marks. The restoration team couldn't bring back those specific memories. But Marcus had an idea. He carefully removed a section of wood from inside Dad's old tool cabinet, wood that bore his fingerprints, his sweat, his daily touch, and incorporated it into the doorframe restoration. It wasn't the same, but it was still him. One evening, as I was approving the final touches on the workshop, my phone rang. "Mom, can we talk?" Her voice sounded small, older. We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral ground. She looked diminished somehow, wearing simple clothes instead of Steve's flashy purchases. "The divorce will be final next month," she said without preamble. "You were right about everything. The investigator, the fraud, the other women he was seeing even while we were married." I said nothing, stirring my coffee. "I was so angry at you," she continued, "but really, I was angry at myself, for being foolish, for being lonely enough to believe his lies, for choosing him over." She stopped, unable to say it. "Over Dad's memory, over me." Yes. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I told myself I was choosing life over death, future over past, but I was just choosing the easy lie over the hard truth. "What do you want, Mom?" Forgiveness? Understanding? I don't know. Maybe just to say that your father would be proud of you. You fought for his legacy when I couldn't even see it was under attack. I thought about Dad's letter, his trust that I would protect everything, even Mom. The garage apartment is still intact. Steve never touched it. You could stay there while you figure things out. Her face crumpled. After everything? Dad would never forgive me if I left you homeless. But Mom, it's just the apartment, the main house. I need that to be mine for a while, to be his. She nodded, understanding. Steve's in jail, fraud, theft, forgery. His kids are living with their mother in California. He lost everything. He never had anything real to begin with. We sat in silence for a moment before she asked, "The workshop, did they restore it? Want to see?" That evening, I led Mom through the house. She gasped at each restoration, touched the rebuilt bookshelf with reverence, ran her fingers along the doorframe where Marcus had embedded Dad's wood. In the workshop, she broke down completely. "It even smells like him," she sobbed. Sawdust and linseed oil, and that awful coffee he'd reheat 3 times. I found myself crying too, both of us standing in Dad's space, grieving properly for the first time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I know. Mom moved into the garage apartment the next week. We're not back to where we were. That trust is gone. But we're building something new, carefully, slowly, like Dad would have done. One board at a time, one joint at a time, making sure each piece is solid before moving to the next. Last night, I sat in Dad's workshop, now fully restored, and opened his old project notebook. On the last page, in his careful handwriting, A house is more than wood and nails. It's love, preserved in physical form. Protect it. Ava. Not just the structure, but what it represents. Our family's story, written in sawdust and sweat. I ran my hand along the workbench he'd built, feeling the smooth wear of his hands in the wood. I kept my promise, Dad, I whispered. I protected it all. The house stood around me, solid and real, every board a testament to his skill and love. Steve had thought he'd won, but he'd forgotten who signed the original. Not just the papers, but the love, the legacy, the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter who both understood that some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth everything. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. What would you have done in my situation? Your stories and perspectives mean everything to me.